Why do I live such a rich life? Why do I have advantages that the people in most other parts of the world do not have? Have you ever stopped and asked yourself that question? If you haven't, you ought to. Because I think it's an important question to ask ourselves. Do you know why God has placed you where you live with the resources and the abilities that you have? Not so you can spend it on yourself. But He has blessed us so that we can be an extension of His blessings in this world. And that's why every weekend, friends, we celebrate what we call our generous giving time. And we celebrate it, yes, we celebrate it because we believe that we serve a generous and gracious God who has so blessed us and enriched our lives beyond what a good portion of this world will never experience. But He's done that for us so that we could be conduits of His grace and His generosity and His mercy to other people. Whether it's in Uganda by making dresses or whether it's just by giving regularly. God has blessed us so that we can bless others. And I have found in my own life over and over and over again that anytime I've taken a new step of faith in my giving and in my generosity, God has more than made up for it. Because He knows that when you are faithful, and this is a biblical principle, when you are faithful with little, you are given much. And you are given much not as a get-rich-quick scheme, but you are giving much because you can now give more. He wants us to live generous lives. It is one of our core values. So I want to encourage you, if you're not in this generous lifestyle yet, get started. You can do it by giving. We won't be taking a collection this morning, but we have giving boxes that are out in the lobby, and you can deposit in one of the giving boxes. You can do it online. You can do it through the Northgate app. And by the way, if you have not yet downloaded the Northgate app, it's a great way to keep in touch. You can also take sermon notes through the Northgate app. So you can just go on to the App Store or Google Play. You can download it. It's free, and it's a great way to keep in touch. It's a great way to be able to give. It's a great way to be a part of our growing church family. So the other thing that we do around here is something called the Dollar Club. And if this is brand new to you, if you're new here to Northgate Bethel, the Dollar Club is something really, really simple. We take an attendance, a head count every week in both of our campuses, both in Benicia and here in San Francisco. And whenever that total number of people are, we set aside $1 per person, women, children, adults, old people, all of us. And we take that amount of money and we set it aside to help a family or an individual in need. And we encourage you, if you are not part of this generous lifestyle, that's a good way to start. Just $1. $1. And then you say, well, what good for $1? Well, listen, $1 put together with about $1,200 other dollars can make a huge difference in somebody's life. And we've been able to use that to help families in need. We've been able to help people who have been out of work for a stretch and just needed some help making some ends meet. We've helped people get reliable transportation. We've helped people cover medical bills. There's just so many ways that $1 can make a difference in somebody's life. So we encourage you, be a part of the Dollar Club. Now, we've committed to do this whether you participate or not. We're going to do the money thing, okay? But we invite you to be a part of blessing somebody else's life. And if you know of somebody or a family in need, you can nominate somebody from the Dollar Club. Just use that connection card that's there in the pew in front of you, in that little shelf there. You grab that, just let us know the person, put your contact information on there so we can get in contact with you to find out the specifics and know how to get in touch with that person and how to help meet that need. So you can not only give, you can also nominate someone for the Dollar Club. So we encourage you to do that. Hey, we have a special guest in our Benicia campus this morning. It's actually a couple who have an incredible story of God's work in their life through some very incredibly difficult circumstances. And so we've got some video announcements. After that, Pastor Larry will come on screen, and we're going to be video feeding into here this morning. So watch these announcements and listen up as they show the message.
Good morning, San Francisco. We are so excited that you're joining us today. We would love the opportunity to connect with you, and a simple way that we can do that is through our connection cards. They're located in the pew in front of you. Some of you might be sitting in these seats for the very first time today. And if that's you, I want to invite you to do something really special with this connection card. Once the service is over, bring it out to the lobby. There's a welcome desk right before you walk out. And at that welcome desk, we have a special gift to say, thanks for checking us out. And we want to invite you back and answer any questions you might have. And if it's your second or third time with us, or maybe you've been coming for a while and you just never let us know that you're here, we would love to see you over there. We have another gift for you, but more importantly, we want to hear how your time has been so far. Maybe some questions have come up between your first time and now. We would love to connect. Alpha Pregnancy Center is having a fundraising gala March 1st at 7 p.m. It will be a fun time of delicious food and great testimony from their ministry. Ron Archer is the keystone speaker, and it will be a great message and testimony of overcoming. The tickets are $50, and you can RSVP at the info desk. On Sunday mornings at 9:30, we have Bible studies meeting. These are available in both English and Spanish. For the next 3 months, we will be going over different promises of God found in the Bible. We would love for you to join us. Confident Living meets on Wednesday nights at 7:30 p.m. We are going through Romans chapters 1 through 8. This is a great time to study God's Word and also meet and connect with other people around here. We would love to see you there. And those are your announcements. We are so glad that you're here today.
Hey, my name's Larry. If this is one of your first times with us, we're glad you're here. If you've been with us for a while, we've been in a conversation in this new year called Kill the Spider, and where we've been talking about how to kill the spider. And today is kind of the finale of that, as we have been discussing and walking our way through the 7 deadly sins, and how spiders cause these webs in our life, and we end up being really just good cleaners of webs. We'll clean them up, and then they'll keep coming back, and then we'll clean them up, and they keep coming back. And ultimately, those webs kind of create a prison that keeps us trapped in and keeps others out, that keeps us from having the ability to be loved like we should be loved, or to give love like we should be able to give it from God and from people in community. And so we've walked through each week, and you're free to go back and review any of those there. You can find those on the website or the app. We have been going through this process, and today we're ending the last spider that we're going to ending with is anger. And to finish with anger, we're taking specific tact of not just how anger and how you can get angry, and we can have aggression towards people or hate, or we could talk about racial reconciliation. We could talk about all kinds of things that make us angry or the way that we behave. Wanted to specifically focus on how to kill the spider of anger when you're angry at God or at a circumstance in your life. When you need to learn how to kill that spider of when maybe you've been put into a club that you never signed up for. Maybe you have a friend that's going through something, or a family member that's going through something, and how God can take all of our anger, and that hope is the way that we kill that spider and continue to depress it down. So I have some special friends that I'm going to show a video in just a minute. They're going to come out and share from an organization called Hope Heals. And so I want to give a special welcome to the Northgate San Francisco Bethel campus. They're with us today, as well as all of you online. And I think that you're just going to really enjoy this. So would you give them, after the video, just a warm Northgate welcome?
I imagine most of us have fairly straightforward pictures in our heads about what our lives will look like and who we will become. When something happens that is not inside the four corners of that picture, we view it as a detour and hope to get back on track as quickly as possible. So what happens when you take a detour and can't ever get back to the original picture?
My detour was a massive brainstem stroke that almost took my life. I had a 6-month-old baby, and my husband was weeks away from finishing law school. Obviously, I lived. However, I've had 11 surgeries, and I can't do so many things I used to. And there is a profound sense of loss that lingers. But I've learned above all other lessons to discover a hope that heals the most broken places. our souls. Perhaps some detours aren't detours at all. Perhaps they are actually the path, the picture, and perhaps they can be perfect.
Hello, good morning.
Hey there.
So good to be with y'all. Thanks. Man,
Good morning.
we should just stop while we're ahead. They're already clapping.
Yeah,
Loved it.
seriously.
We don't want to mess it up. Okay, well, I guess
Okay.
we'll do it good ones. Thanks for having us. Gosh, we have been in California for 14 years and just moved back to be near our families in Georgia the past 6 months. And this is our first time back in California, so it's really cool to get to be back. Thank you guys for having us.
It is, and,
So, yeah, we're thrilled to be here. We miss
Yeah.
California so much, too. Goodness
and I'm
gracious.
sure everyone in the world tells you this, but I mean, the drive to get to your church is obscene. And wow, it does make us miss California. So, yeah, we're on this level of incredible beauty.
That's beautiful. Well, my name is Jay,
And I'm Catherine.
and we're so grateful to kind of put some flesh and bones on this story of God and the world, this story of redeeming our hard emotions and replacing them with something new
Yeah.
and something that provides flourishing and health for ourselves and our communities. And so today we're going to tell you a bit of our story, but we don't want you to overlook the fact that it's really your story too. The specifics are going to be different, probably, but the reality is the story of God in the world is a story of broken things made new, of near death being turned and overwhelmed by new life. So that's our story, and it's your story too, because all these stories help us remember the story of God.
We like to share with people when they listen to us talk about our story that we kind of have a provocative thought that we actually are all disabled. That it's not just me in the wheelchair, but every one of us has wheelchairs internally of all sorts. And we've all got a big old wheelchair inside of us that most people don't see based on hard things we're going through, the brokenness we feel, the fear, the shame, all the things. And for all of us, we think that this is, some messed up stuff. I feel like I'm a big old hot mess on the inside, and you see some of it on the outside, and yet there's a freedom to recognizing that. And as the body of Christ, we feel like we have to recognize that we can't do this life, whether we're able-bodied or not. And we want you, as you listen to us, to not just hear our story as a cool story, that you really separate from your own life, and that this is the end of the series you're doing, and this is like, it'd be easy to remove yourself from us, but we think that'd be such a tragedy, because of course, this is your story too. The specifics are probably different. Probably most of you haven't had a brainstem stroke and nearly died and become disabled afterwards. However, you've probably been through some hard stuff. And life hasn't probably always turned out like you thought it would. And you likely have some brokenness and suffering in your story of all kinds. And the specifics are a little bit irrelevant, Like we all have really hard things to deal with. And to bring it back around to anger, as this final week is about, we all have areas where we can feel real anger and bitterness at God. My life just blew up. And maybe in very small ways, my life is blowing up. And what do you do with all of that? And we have some thoughts. So let's jump into our story.
So we're from the South originally. Like I said, we just moved back to Georgia to be near our families. But Catherine and I went to a small Christian college called Samford, and that's where we met many years ago. And it was great when we moved to California because everybody thought we had gone to Stanford, and we kind of just let them think that. But it was actually not that school. This is another one. It was Samford in Alabama. So anyway, that's where we met, and my dad is a pastor, and so he married us shortly after we graduated from college, and he preached over us that day of our wedding, Matthew 7, which is the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, it really matters what you found your life on. It's really easy to think that we don't need to invest in our life in things that matter eternally, but it matters because the storms are coming. And if you found it on the sand, the storms are going to wash everything away. But if you founded your life and your house on the rock, no matter what storms come, you're going to be able to withstand them. And we said, Dad, that's kind of a bummer wedding message. Why would you talk about our house falling down? We're 22. What are you talking about? The love chapter would have been better. But anyway, in his wisdom, he gave us that promise that if you invest your life and you build your life on the rock that is Jesus, it's never going to disappoint you, no matter what happens. And a couple years later, we would actually face that storm that we never saw coming, but those words were reverberating in our heads as we left that wedding day and we moved to California on an adventure. Didn't have any family here, just had this sense that God was calling us to California. Now, I was going to go to law school at Pepperdine, and Catherine had been doing some modeling in the South and got an agent in LA and thought she'd try her hand out in some entertainment industry.
And we always like to make a big deal about Catherine's modeling career because it was huge. I mean, you probably heard of me like Giselle, Catherine Wolf. I mean, it was huge. I think we were at the pinnacle of my modeling career, so you can see what a big deal I was. Here I am at the Disneyland Tiki Hut, modeling the 25th anniversary Moo Moo. So, I was a really big deal.
Somebody whistled. That was awesome. Also, that was not me in that picture. I don't know who that strange man is holding my wife's hand in that really hideous shirt. So we had ups and downs in our early marriage, in our seeking of dreams and adventures, and yet one thing we really did right was we planted ourselves in a church. Bel Air Pres Church became our home, and it was the first Sunday in LA that we found this home and never looked back, and went there to our very last Sunday that we lived in LA, actually. And the body of Christ, if you don't know it, changes your story forever, and it has changed ours. I know we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for this community surrounding us and hoping for us when we couldn't even hope for ourselves. And little did we know, though, at that time when we were leading the Young Marrieds group, that this was God preparing us for what He had prepared for us. And we were thinking about the hard issues of marriage and really getting in there in community. And it was what we invested our life in and our time. And it was something that changed everything, really. Fast forward a little bit, I was in my final year of law school, and we had a baby, which is not exactly something I'd recommend if you're in grad school to have a baby kind of unexpectedly, but it was part of God's 5-year plan, and it happened really just at the right time. So our son James was born in the fall of 2007, and almost 6 months to the day after this picture was taken, we would face that storm that would change everything.
Yeah, it was just a totally normal morning, and I felt funny, but I felt funny since having a baby 6 months before. So I'd been in like a haze, I guess you'd say, and it felt foggy, and my head hurt, and a little dizzy. But I just didn't think of anything out of the ordinary, especially because I'm perfectly healthy. I have no medical history, no family history, nothing, like no indications this could be anything serious at all. And I just had a baby. So I'm just like, I'll get on with my day, put the baby out for a nap. Excuse me. And Jay just happens, which I don't believe it just happened, that he came home from his final law school class to print a paper in like a 45-minute window. So he's at home, I'm in the kitchen, I'm feeling weird, and I fall to my hands and knees. And they go totally numb, and I start throwing up. And I'm like, oh, something's the matter, like really bad. So I'm able to call to Jay to call 911, And the paramedics quickly come, pack me up on the stretcher, determined it is something serious. And I can remember, like, my final thoughts before leaving the apartment were, like, so surface. Like, I hope I think I should get a toothbrush before we leave in case I have to spend the night. And I wonder if I ate, like, something weird yesterday. That burrito was funny. And I've got food poisoning and, like, all these surfacey thoughts. And I, of course, had no idea that when I left on the stretcher and then went into a coma-like deal, that it would be 2 months before I even woke up from that moment. So I'm thinking grab a toothbrush, and then 2 months had gone by before I regained consciousness.
And that day was April 21st in 2008, and as we tell this day in our life and everything changed, maybe you're remembering the day in your life and everything changed too. When you got that diagnosis or that phone call, or you lost somebody that you loved out of the blue, and it's the reality of the world that we live in. You wake up and it could be the best day of your life or the worst day, or it could be the last day. Yeah. And that is why we need Jesus and we need each other. And we don't have to be afraid because of that. And so for us, though, that day, you can wrap our heads around it. We had all these dreams of our future and what was next, and the new season, the new baby, and I'm getting out of school, and the next thing. And all of a sudden, it's almost gone in a moment. And so I raced with our son behind the ambulance to UCLA Hospital. I didn't even know they had a hospital. I knew they had a school. But I remember coming around the corner and seeing this big billboard that said UCLA Hospital, the best hospital in the West, and the number 3 hospital in the country. And I realized that in that chaos, God was making order. He was making a path for us. And I raced in, I looked around, and it was a Monday afternoon. I was super confused for a second because there was a bunch of familiar faces, and I realized really quickly it was my church family. And so often when the bottom falls out of our life, we want this invisible God to be made visible. We're angry that we don't have somebody to hold us and to beat our hands on the chest. And God says, look around. The body is around you. The body of Christ is the invisible God made visible when we need him the most. And that's the gift we get to give each other. That's the gift my church family gave me that day. And they gathered around while the doctor on call, named Dr. Nestor Gonzalez, who just happens to be a world-renowned neurosurgeon who takes on all of the hardest cases. He said, I need you to know your wife likely is not going to survive the day. And I'm not even sure we can do the surgery. And frankly, the fact that I was a lawyer was not helping the case for him to do it. And he just said she is suffering a massive brainstem stroke. I think it is from a defect and a malformation she's had her whole life, but she never knew, and I'm sure until this moment. And unfortunately, it's the largest I've ever seen. It's called an AVM. It's surrounding her brainstem. The bleeding is making her brain herniate down into her spine. This is not survivable. And I'm so sorry. And I was just holding my baby, and I remember he left to go sort of think about things in his office, and he's not a believer, but the Holy Spirit, I believe, came to him and said, give this mom a second chance. And he said he couldn't get our little baby out of his mind. And so he took her into surgery. It was going to be 8 hours, and about 100 of us gathered in the waiting room just to kind of pray and have vigil that night. And I've grown up in the church, but I really think I experienced true church that night. And maybe you know what I mean, but the overflow of our praise and our awe of God is not culminated most when everything is going perfect, but really when everything is falling apart. Because we look around and we realize, but God intervening, there is no way forward for us. And so that night, we just gathered around that idea and prayed and cried and laughed, and just it was this beautiful moment of what community looks like and not being aloneness looks like. And I remember out of Romans 8, which Catherine had memorized as a child, those amazing promises that there's nothing that can separate us from God's love, and he's working all these things for good. And yet in that moment when I realized I might wake up without a wife and my 6-month-old might wake up without a mom, I didn't know if I could believe that. It doesn't feel very loving right now. It doesn't feel very good, what God has allowed in my life. But I knew I was going to have to bet everything on that promise and bet Catherine's life on that promise. And the sun came up that next morning. The surgeon came out and he was just exhausted. And he said he hadn't even looked at the clock. It had been 16 straight hours of microbrain surgery to remove the mass and remove part of Catherine's brain that was ruptured. And he said, Catherine lived. And I'll never forget those words, and we celebrate them to this day as her second birthday, Catherine Lived Day. And it's been 10 years this past year that we celebrated. 10 years. Thank you. It's so sweet. Thank you. 10 years of a second chance. Again, we're all living out second chance lives, aren't we? And we just kind of get more of a reminder to celebrate that and not waste it and live into it. But that's all our stories. And we're all miracles. It's really the long and short of it. But basically, Dr. Gonzalez said, she's alive, but I don't know if she's going to wake up. I don't know what the prognosis will be. She might be paralyzed or vegetative or locked in, but she's alive. And so he went to rest and said, but she's going to be in a medically induced coma to give her some time to heal. And so you guys just you go rest yourselves. And so anyway, we went away that night, and the nurse from the ICU paged Dr. Gonzalez, and he thought that Catherine had died. And so he raced back up to the ICU. And the nurse said, no, you won't believe it. It's the opposite. She's actually trying to communicate already. So I say, raise your fingers, and she's raising them. She's still unconscious. But then I say, wiggle your toes, and she's wiggling them. So it means she's not paralyzed. She's not brain dead. It's the first miracle of many miracles. And as you can tell, they don't make medically induced comas that can hold this woman down from communicating that she's in there. Hold on, don't give up on me. Thank God. And praise God that she did. But then she'd be taken to the ICU and stay there for 40 days. And so the beautiful thing about when we really take some time and look back on the story of God in our life is that we see details we might not have seen before. They were too close before. And I realized that it wasn't 39 days or 41, it was 40 days that she had been in this place of wilderness, suffering and struggling. And God was saying, just because I'm silent doesn't mean I've abandoned you. I'm taking you to somewhere that I promised you. We're going to do it together, but just hang on.
And I wish I could say that from that moment it was just straight uphill and everything was great. That's not really what happened. From the ICU, I would like to back up. So what happened, the AVM that ruptured, just want to make this very clear, it was a birth defect. Like I had this birth defect that grew and grew, and then one day ruptured in my brainstem and caused a massive stroke. And what's craziest about that is that actually is not the reason that my body is so messed up. I'm in a wheelchair and my hand doesn't work and I can't see and my face is paralyzed and all these things. These are actually the result of the surgeon saving my life, which is such a beautiful concept for us believers, that in the deep wounding came the ultimate healing, that I'm alive because he made the decision to wound me greatly so that I would sustain life. And I just find that thought so comforting for us that many times in the deep wounding comes the ultimate healing. And that was my story, and it was not easy then or now in some ways, much easier now. But I would be in the acute rehab for 2.5 months after the ICU, and then another 1.5 years in rehab. And waking up in the acute rehab was so, there are no words even. I just couldn't understand what had happened to me. I was just totally in shock. I think I remember some grandmothers had a stroke one time, and I couldn't fathom that I'm perfectly healthy and 26, and I've almost died and become severely disabled, and it was awful. And yet, by far the worst pain of it all was not a physical pain. And I was being fed through a tube in my stomach, and I had machines hooked up to my whole body. I mean, there was legitimately lots of pain. But the worst part of it was the daily James viewings, where a sweet friend and family would bring the baby, who's now 8 months old, into the room to visit me. And I wouldn't understand. I couldn't take care of him anymore, or feed him, or like Mississippi act with his mother, so I was obsessed over how to do that from the hospital bed. And it was very, very sad. I think they already showed that picture of my first Mother's Day, which is really, really, really sad because I have no memory of that day. And, I see that picture and know that, that is terrible loss that I will never regain fully. That baby, his mommy was there in Maudie, but I have no memory of my first Mother's Day and several more months after that, actually. And from that really, really terrible time, when I could sit up on the edge of my bed at the hospital bed for 3 minutes, they deemed me medically fit to move to the brain rehab. So I moved to the group rehab facility, and there it's when I really started to relearn to walk a little, which I can do, like hobbling a tiny bit around today. And I finally was able to eat food again and learn to speak with this new robot voice I have, and learn to, move a marble painfully across a table after 10 hours and hard stuff. So it was awesome because I was regaining my life, and yet it was so dark and so terrible. Many of you have ever been to brain rehab, you can attest the darkness, the sadness, the depression, the people who feel like they're shot and life is over, which is most people, and the very real death. And people in my rehab group were full on dying. 3 of them died while I'm there. So it was just a really sad, deep, dark time with people have really intense cognitive issues and just a lot of sadness. And see, I was getting well, so it was really complicated for me emotionally and spiritually. And I think that's where the anger at God comes in so much. In that time, there were many moments. One that stands out in my mind of really wondering if God had made a mistake leaving me on earth. And that if I had not been there anymore, if Jay could remarry, if James could have a normal mommy. And I remember just very distinctly feeling like I was caught between life and death. And that it would be easier if I had died. And in those darkest moments, I did just think I want it to be true that God made a mistake. I want to see in my clear enlightenment that this was void of God, 100%. That this for sure is outside of something that ultimately He is in control of. Because that would make it feel better to me, I think. Surely God's not in this. And in that horrible moment, I don't have time to read it probably, but I write about it, that even though I really wanted that to be true, even deeper than that, I felt such an awakening of the scripture I'd known since I was a little girl. And it came out and overwhelmed so much of the other thought in this deep, deep sense that God, that Romans 8:28 was working all things for good, that I was, Psalm 139, I was fearfully and wonderfully made in my mother's womb, and that's where the AVM was in my brain. That I would see the goodness of God in the land of the living. I could lean into that hope, that Exodus 14:14, that all I had to do was be still and know that He's God. And some of these verses and thoughts weren't even stuff I knew that I knew. I'd walked with the Lord since I was a little girl. And I think the stories, the verses, the Christian camps and the college, like all that was floating around in my head and heart. And when I needed it the very most, to overwhelm the darkness. And I couldn't deny, even though I really wanted to, that God was calling me something very special. That God was saying, in your terrible pain in this moment, I'm elevating your life. And that this is me choosing you, Catherine, for something very unique, Ephesians 4:1. This is a special calling that you have, and you are charged to live a life worthy of that. And so in that moment, and really in every moment since then, I've really felt very chosen by God, which is so upside down kingdom living, isn't it? That I'm in the wheelchair, and I think that was my throne in many ways, my seat of honor, that I feel chosen by God, that I feel very special for the hardships and suffering, because it means that I really get a unique platform to share about Jesus and my hope. It's like the volume God turned up on my life, and that's a gift beyond anything I could ever have, to see with certainty that God not only was taking care of me, but has given me something really special to steward. And that's all of our pain, if we see it that way.
The kind of post, or the epilogue after that moment, was that Catherine, again, didn't magically get well all of a sudden, didn't magically go back to being life as it was before everything changed. Suffering births us into new people, new creations. And the real work is whether we'll show up to a life we never signed up for.
Yeah.
Whether we'll trust God's goodness enough and redefine maybe what it even means to be good in a way that gives us this hope that propels us into this unknown future, living out this life that we never saw coming, and finding ultimately that it's good because He's good. And, there's been a lot of ups and downs since. We kind of think we've gone through suffering, we can check it off the bucket list, but that's not how it works this side of heaven, right? And there can be anger when we feel like, gosh, I've already been through enough, God. How could you let this happen to me again? More hardship and struggle. And God has said to us, Catherine had a separate aneurysm than her stroke. She had, broke her leg and shattered it. We've had struggles relationally across the board. And it'd be easy to think that God has now turned His back on us finally. Or, that for some reason He's not going to show up again. But He says so tenderly to us in our pain and in our anger and in our struggle, what is it that you want from me? Do you just want to stop hurting so much? Or do you want to know the healer of the world? Because that's me, and that's what I'm offering you is myself, not just some outcome that you think is best. I'm offering you the best thing in the whole universe, which is me. Do you want just this life you think you're entitled to because you've been through a lot? Or do you want to know the giver of every good and perfect gift? Because that's me. And seeing God that way has the ability to diffuse all of our unmet expectations and our anger and our hurts. And it's the beginning of our healing. And more than that, we get to heal when we go back to those places of our wounding. So for us, we've gone back in this season of our life, and we do ministry full-time together. We have for 5 years, but it's branched off into families with special needs, who are the largest minority group in the world, the most unchurched people group. And in a way, we kind of thought, we don't want to associate with that. It's too painful. It's too much. It's a reminder of what our life isn't anymore. And yet God said, but they'll listen to you when you tell them that it's not the end of their story. So I know it's going to be hard to go back to that place of your wounding, but you're going to find healing there too. And you're going to offer healing to other people in my name. That's how God works. But the question is, are we brave enough to trust Him to hope it forward with what He's given us? The hope and comfort we've received is not just for us to be comfortable, it's for us to give it away. And in the giving away, we'll remember the God of all comfort, and we'll make Him known in this place.
I had 11 surgeries after the stroke until 2014. So for the first 6 years after the stroke, I had surgery after surgery after surgery after relearning how to do things and relearning and relearning. And finally, the doctors deemed me medically fit to become pregnant. And I did. In the fall of 2014, we had a baby, John Nestor, in the summer of 2015. And that little now 3-year-old is making us totally insane. In the very best ways. He's super active and driving disabled mama insane, but he's just such a gift. And his name, John, means the Lord has been gracious, if you know the meaning of John. My favorite passage of the book of John is John 9:3, where you may know the story of the blind man. And Jesus says, well, this man was born blind so that the works of God would be displayed in him. And of course, that's our prayer for our John, is that the works of God would be displayed in him. And John's middle name, Nestor, do I have time to read it really quick? Probably not. Stands for Nestor, my doctor, Nestor Gonzalez, my brain surgeon. So the baby's middle name is Dr. Nestor Gonzalez, Nestor. And Nestor, yeah, not the whole rest. Nestor, the name Nestor, and we did not know this at the time, means homecoming, remembrance, and seeker of miracles. Just so beautiful. And our prayer is that whenever John Nestor gets to tell the meaning of his name, he'll get to tell his story. And in telling his story, he will bear witness to light and darkness, and near death and new life, and just the gospel story that broken things make new things. And John Nestor will get to, just really be a flesh and bones representation of our faith. And that is just such a gift and encouragement to us.
Well, that's all of us, too.
Yeah.
That we get to live out in our bodies, not just the death of Christ, but the resurrection, and go out into this world and share that hope. So thanks for letting us share our story with you today. We're so grateful for this community and being with you this Sunday. We're going to pray for you before we leave.
Thank you. Yeah. So I pray real quick that we love you all. Father, we are hard pressed, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but we are not in despair. We are persecuted, but we are never abandoned. We are struck down, but we are never destroyed. We always carry in our bodies the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our bodies, Lord. We cling to 2 Corinthians 4, that you are our one true hope, Lord. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much. You guys can stay standing. They're going to go out into the lobby in just a minute. Sorry they're not in the lobby with you at the Bethel campus. I'm going to actually, in a moment, pass you back to the host. But you can stay standing. And, I just love that broken things can make new things.